Oh no, yeah, it was just I think back on the whole money thing, it's just an allocation of resources in the economy. So yeah, you're right, Michael. While we still have that scarcity, when not everyone can get everything that they want, there is that allocation of resources, which is denoted by money. The thing is, the value currently is being captured by the Microsofts, the Amazons. What I do in my day job is automating away work with these Microsoft licenses. Whether it's Power Automate or Power Apps, and all the sort of robotic process stuff that's essentially replacing the income that's being attributed to the jobs of those employees to then replace it with the license cost that Microsoft is capturing. Well, we get a clip as well while doing that. So, the Microsofts and the Amazons are essentially accumulating more and more of that value in the economy. So it goes towards the share price of that company, so the share capital, and as such, it's really accumulated towards the shareholders of that company, and that's why if we don't implement a UBI, more and more of that value will be accumulated into these small and small players, and then there'll be civil unrest because the inequality will just drive that dystopia. So I think UBI is inevitable. It's how we want to make that transition in a less violent way. So that's the sort of how we can take that value away and distribute that equally, more equally, to prevent that inequality from happening.
I mentioned earlier Alex Howlett, who's founder of something called CMT, which is Consumer Monetary Theory. So that's modern monetary theory, but without the job guarantee, more or less, with a UBI instead of a job guarantee. So I think it's an improvement. But he got into this whole thing because of the issue of intellectual property and program. He was a programmer, and he saw the sort of dynamic that you were talking about. He was like, we could, the problem is that intellectual property is sort of all the money is going to intellectual property, and for example, you could give away software and not patent it. You could do it all open source, but then there wouldn't be any jobs for programmers. And so it was like, well, that's how he got into the idea of a universal basic income, because if programmers could all just, and I know programmers who are like this, who are, plenty of programmers working at big tech who are basically in their hearts communists, right? Or anarchists who don't really want to have a job, they would just write code all day anyhow, because of the sort of inherent appeal of doing that work. And they love solving the technical problems. On their weekends, they go home and they work on other tech projects that don't pay them any money, right? And probably if they didn't have to do the jobs, the tech projects that they do would be even better. But intellectual property ends up being this necessary way of capturing some money so that they can, for the company, so the company can employ them. And, the snake is sort of eating its tail a little bit. So that's a, now look, I'm going to, but I also think what you're talking about is the dropping share of wages as a share of income in the economy, which is relevant to what Michael and I were talking about before, the monetary idea. A UBI is a monetary tool, looking at these big macroeconomic pictures, and the work of a guy called Jeff Crocker, who we might get on, he's actually shown that spending has overtaken wages since the 70s. So it used to be that the total wage bill of the economy was greater than the total consumer spend. Now the total consumer spend is greater than the total wage bill. So that means that unearned non-wage income is already filling that gap, and that's two things. It's either passive income, like shareholders getting it, or credit cards and loans, right? And both of those things have, there's a sort of a moral turpitude to both of those things, taking up a bigger and bigger share of the economy. But he says rather than trying to push all the money back out through wages, we use a basic income.